In a powerful show of support for nature, nearly every government in the world united behind the CBD's sweeping biodiversity plan for life on Earth. They committed to halting the extinction of threatened animal, plant, and fungi species. And in an historic first, they also committed to helping those species recover, so that the life we share our planet with can not only survive, but thrive. Making these goals a reality will take all of us working together. Reverse the Red is supporting governments, conservation experts, and communities around the world as they join forces to activate tried and tested tools and tie global efforts to local expertise. All in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can secure our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Hello, I'm Amanda Vincent, and I'm chair of the IUCN Species Survival Commission's Marine Conservation Committee. And as we go into World Oceans Day tomorrow, we thought it would be great to share with you some of the work that's being done by our expert groups, our specialist groups around the world. And I'm going to talk about promising progress in marine conservation. Now, we're not going to have immediate magical solutions to everything, but we're going to talk about ways that we're moving forward with hope and optimism. So let me share with you some of those thoughts. So I am chair, as I say, of the Marine Conservation Committee, but also of the IUCN SSC Seahorse, Pipefish, and Sea Dragon Specialist Group. You'll hear a little bit about our taxa when we get to that. But in the meantime, let me just introduce you to our ocean. So one of the things that most of us on this call will recognize is the ocean is critically important. Indeed, about 99% of the world's living space, our biosphere, is in the ocean. So here we are rolling into World Ocean Day, and let's just stop and be inspired for a little bit by the marine life around us. So this, for example, this is a picture by Michael Aw, and this is Bryde's whale ripping through a sardine bait ball offshore South Africa's Transkei coast. Or this, for example, this glorious emperor penguin in Antarctica. We have these spectacular mudflats near where I live in Vancouver, British Columbia. And they are, of course, rich with marine life as well and with diverse species. Or we look at the sea pen that's popping up in an eelgrass meadow in the Matamba estuary. These aren't plants, but these are colonies of polyps where one individual grows large and serves as a stalk from which others reach out to capture food in their tentacles. This is one of my favorite habitats, seagrasses. Makes me very, very happy to swim and work in seagrasses. Or what about this manta ray at a cleaning station? So it's holding a near stationary position atop a coral patch for several minutes while being cleaned. Or here's a seamount in Cortez Bank. This is off California, the glorious, glorious seaweeds. And then we have anemones and soft corals shining in all their brilliance, absolutely glorious coloration. And we have cabbage corals off in Indonesia. Or for example, with the anthias and soft corals. Again, just incredibly diverse and beautiful, really draws you in. Schools of krill, which often underpin everything else. We have the rock bridges, deep, deep in the ocean, and a whole ton of other spectacular marine life. Hydrothermal vents on the Juan de Fuca Ridge near us in Vancouver, British Columbia. And then to end, one of the most glorious octopuses. And if you pull this all together, you've got this absolutely glorious constellation of shape and form and color and size and lifestyle, and really quite astonishing, quite beautiful. So this is the ocean. This is the marine life of the ocean, rather. And this is what we all care about and are trying to protect and conserve. So let's tell you a little bit about what the IUCN Species Survival Commission is doing. The IUCN, most of you will probably know, is the family of conservation organizations that holds us all together. There are about 1,400 organizations, 1,450. And out of those, we have about 250 state organizations or government organizations, as well as perhaps about 1,100 non-governmental organizations and perhaps 100 Indigenous organizations. And together, the IUCN looks after nature for us. And out of its 7 commissions, one of them is the Species Survival Commission, while the others focus on things like protected areas or ecosystem management, environmental economics and social policy, or environmental law, education and communication, and also the climate crisis. We focus particularly on species. And I chair its Marine Conservation Committee, one of the main jobs of which is to support all the diverse marine taxon specialist groups. So specialist groups are groups of experts who are appointed to try to come up with ways to care for our ocean, well, our species, in this case, our ocean species, or indeed sometimes to support particular themes like climate change or conservation monitoring. So the specialist groups all subscribe to one common view, which is that we're here to assess, to plan, and to act, all in a context of networking and communicating. So the Assess, Plan, Act is a cycle. You can enter it at any point with a particular taxon. You're not required to assess its conservation status before you move forward, because sometimes just common sense allows you to move forward even as you try to find the data to assess the population status. So here we're talking about Assess, Plan, Act in hopefully an integrated approach that really amounts to adaptive management. And related to this, we're also trying to think through how we implement decisions. So one of the big issues that isn't much considered is that we have an awful lot of very good policies and acts and pieces of legislation that could enable us to support species better, but they're not very well implemented. So one of the pieces of work that some of the marine specialist groups have been doing is to figure out what are the challenges with implementation. And so Yvonne Sadovi from the Grouper and Wrasse Specialist Group, and Sarah Foster from the Seahorse, Pipefish, and Sea Dragon Specialist Group, Sarah Fowler from the Shark Specialist Group, and Sue Lieberman, who works on a lot of policy, and I have got together to figure out what are the challenges to implementation. And what we've realized is that people are not actually parsing out what we mean by implementation well. So it's pretty clear that if we want to save species, we've got to have an impact on their populations. We actually have to have better numbers or better demographics, or we have to have more diverse life histories. We have to have protected their reproductive capacity. And that is what our focus must always be. To do that, there's many, many tools. And these really amount to the Assess, Plan, Act. So for example, we need to figure out the technical outputs. And this is things like producing ID guides or developing genetic tools or frameworks for policy action. It can be any sort of material that will help us to implement that is totally within the control of the technical experts. But what really matters is whether that actually converts into policy outcomes, by which I mean, do we have indeed those measures which would enable us to actually make progress for the species in the wild? And you can think of this as a stylized flow. In this case, I've put it on a run of river. And this is all very good, but what really matters is whether we have field outcomes. So if you like, this is the Assess Plan Act cast in a different tone. And the action is where we actually have the intention hit the animals. So do we have market change? Do we have change in landings? Do we have actual judicial implementation in the form of courts of law? So this is the work that we're trying to ensure actually happens, that we flow from technical outputs to policy outcomes to field outcomes. And it's challenging for sure. So one way to think of this would be for a protected area, the technical outputs might be actually suggesting where the protected area should occur. The policy outcomes would then be deciding, yes, we want protected areas in this particular place. And the field outcome would be the wardens on the front line or the communities working directly to try to protect the species and keep out invaders. And this then should lead theoretically to population impacts. So let's talk about this with some straightforward examples from the species specialist groups. So I'm going to introduce 7 specialist groups. Some of their chairs and co-chairs or representatives are on this call, and some would be available for further questions later. So we're going to be talking or hearing from Sophie George, who's the new chair of the brand new specialist group for Marine Stars. We're going to be hearing from Francoise Cabada Blanco from the coral specialist groups. And Elsa Camins Martinez from Spain, from the Seahorse, Pipefish, and Sea Dragon Specialist Group. Yvonne Sadovi, who's on this call, from the Grouper and Wrasse Specialist Group. Eric Hoyt from the Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force, another part of the Species Survival Commission. We have a number of task forces. Then Noor Dalmau from the Seaweed Specialist Group and Nicole Duplay from the Otter Specialist Group. And they're really going to take us through some examples of Assess Plan Act. Now, the first is very nascent. The first is the Marine Star Specialist Group. And why is this a success? Because we have a Marine Star Specialist Group. So one of the foibles of ocean conservation is that we tend to have focused on the marine mammals and birds, and then the fishes a bit more. But we had done very, very little in the Species Survival Commission for the marine invertebrates. So we've put a push on recently and created the Seaweed Specialist Group that you'll hear from later. But we focused on the marine invertebrates with the Marine Star and the Sea Cucumber Specialist Group. We have an aquatic fungi specialist group, but we also have a new emerging sponge specialist group. So the joy here is that we're starting to pay attention to the invertebrates, which often underpin our ecosystems, of course, but also fisheries. Here's an example of an invertebrate specialist group, and what it plans to do as it sets forward on its voyage of conservation.
Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be presenting this new specialist group to you all. This presentation was prepared by Christian Galvan Villa at the institution in Mexico, and I have the honor to modify and present it to you today. As we all know, the International Union for Conservation of Nature was created in 1948 and is the world's largest and most diverse environmental organization. Over the years, many species have been assessed, as shown from this graph, and the target is 160,000, and that's coming up soon. The organization has identified more than 44,000 species that are threatened with extinction. And as you look at this group of organisms, from amphibians to reptiles to cycads, one thing you'll notice that's absent is marine invertebrates, including sea stars. So thanks to the Species Survival Commission, in 2023, the Marine Star Specialist Group came into existence. This new expert group focuses on asteroids, ophiuroids, and crinoids. And here is a beautiful subset of pictures of some of the most amazing marine stars in the world, from a live-bearing sea star to the crown of thorns sea star, to sea lilies and feather stars. It's just an amazing group that we have so far neglected. But thanks to the SSC, we're now getting started. We hope to work in close collaboration with the Marine Invertebrate Red List Authority and the Sea Cucumber Specialist Group to ensure coordinated red listing of marine stars and bring members up to speed with red list training. So far, in this group that just started last year, we have over 12 experts that have already taken the red listing course. After we've completed assessment of as many species as possible, we will start the planning, and action will then be taken to conserve as many species as possible. So our main mission is to provide information to the IUCN on the diversity of all these species in our group and their role in maintaining ecosystem biodiversity and function. Most of the threats have been identified mainly due to climate change, for example, disease, etc., and invasive species, but there's others that are basically man-made, coastal development, deep sea mining is also a threat, habitat destruction is also another threat to a majority of these species. So I think I already mentioned this. The only species that has been assessed among all the marine stars is the sunflower sea star. Of 2,000 asteroids, that's the only one that has been assessed, and it's known to be critically endangered. It's threatened by sea star wasting disease, which is caused by some viral infection. Unfortunately, Pycnopodia is not the only species affected. There's over 19 other sea stars from Antarctica to New Zealand that are affected by sea star wasting disease, but none of them have been assessed. There's also threats to ophiuroids and crinoids. We know a lot about them. We know that they're beautiful. We know from lab experiments that they're lethal, and in some cases, non-lethal effects of climate change, ocean acidification, pollution, and deep sea mining. But none of these species have been assessed. So we're going to go to work and get things done as soon as we can. So this is just a subset of the Mexican experts that attend regularly. And thanks to Christian, shown here on the right, who actually prepared this initially and presented it at his institution. So with that, I'll thank you all. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at the SSC Marine Star Specialist Group website online. Thanks again, and hope to hear from you all.
So currently, experts are already joining from around the world, which is what we try to have in all of our specialist group, a good representative coverage of the areas and the issues. So I think we can all agree that it's very encouraging that we finally have a focal expert group for the conservation of these spectacular marine stars. And if you know of anybody who has skills and expertise, I'm sure that Sophie would absolutely love to hear from you to contribute to this, particularly to assist with the red list assessments. So this, if you like, comes under the category of networking. It's a new group, and we're confident that it's going to have a lot to say over the years to come and how it's looking after these extraordinary, wonderful creatures. And, you know, a general focus on invertebrates is desperately needed. And all of us who are marine lovers on this call can keep saying, but what about the invertebrates? But what about the invertebrates? And that would be a big contribution. So the next one we're going to talk about is moving into the assess part of our Assess Plan Act. So this is really how we gather information so that we can make a properly integrated assessment of the conservation status of species. Altogether, too often, we've relied entirely on primary literature from Western institutions, and that's far from representative of the big pool of knowledge that we should be able to access if we really want to have a proper understanding of what's happening in the oceans. So moving into gathering information from more diverse sources and respecting what it can offer to our understanding is really quite critical. And here's Francoise Cabado Blanco talking about promising progress on that with the Coral Specialist Group.
Hello to everyone. My name is Francoise Cabado. And today I'm going to give you a very brief glimpse into how, by tapping into local lore, we can help in conserving marine species. That is formally known as local ecological knowledge, and that is the knowledge that is held by a group of people in a community about their local environment, and it has usually been acquired through experience and observation. Centuries, local ecological knowledge has been pivotal to indigenous communities and local communities globally to manage their resources and also for their survival. The relationship between humans and their environment is more evident in traditional practices like farming, fishing, and hunting, where the practices have been developed and adapted around the cycles of nature to maximize the benefit that we obtain from it, but also to reduce this risk. This is through years of observing nature and deducing its pattern. That ability of being able to spend time in the same environment that most species live and observe is actually invaluable for us as scientists, especially in the case of species that are difficult to see. Sadly, in the marine environment, we scientists and conservationists are very limited about the time we can actually spend and how deep and for how long we can get to observe these species. So in the case of marine species, local ecological knowledge is indeed an incredibly useful and valuable tool. To illustrate how I got involved with working with local ecological knowledge to inform my practice in conservation, I'm going to briefly talk about the pillar coral, my dearest species, Dendrogyra cylindrum. It is a very special coral. It's the only species in its genus. It's the only coral that displays its polyps. As you can see in the picture, it looks like hairy during the day, and it's endemic to the Caribbean. Back in 2014, there was very, very limited information about where the coral had been sighted recently and also about its abundance. In Venezuela, where I'm originally from, we started or participated actually in a red listing exercise. And going through the data, we realized that the only information available was qualitative, so seen or not seen, and it dated back from the 80s. Going through data from 15 years of monitoring, scientific quantitative monitoring, there was no record of any colonies in those transects. And talking to experts, they had constantly only seen one colony in a very beautiful MPA called Archipelago Los Roques. Fearing the wars that it was locally extinct, we set out and started talking to the fishers and spending time with them to try to see, okay, how can we best start our surveys? And to our surprise, for them, the species was not rare at all. It's very common for them, or was at that time, and they actually even have a local name for it, Caramujo. We were able to confirm all the sites where they told us we would find, and in fact, it was true for 99% of them. That information helped us have a better picture of where the species can be found in the MPA and of its abundance. We actually reported the highest abundance for the species so far. This type of research fed into a global assessment of the extinction risk for the species, and we were able to change the category from vulnerable to critically endangered, moving the species in the conservation priority globally and mobilizing resources for its conservation action. This is just a very tiny and local example of how tapping into local knowledge can advance scientific understanding and help in conserving some of the most rare and wonderful species in our oceans. Local ecological knowledge can not only help in fill the gaps that we have in scientific data by providing first-hand observations and also long-term trends. It also offers culturally sensitive approaches to conservation and to ecosystem management, helping design and implement more effective policy and management interventions. It also encourages community to get involved in science, and importantly, it encourages and helps preserve cultural practices. So the benefits of local ecological knowledge in conservation are comprehensive and really, really valuable.
Apologies for my asthmatic cough here. So as you can see, there's two elements of that are really important. One is we're gathering knowledge, which, as Francoise says, will allow us to help set priorities better, so we understand the status of species better. But the other is that conservationists, in a professional sense, are learning to show more respect for other forms of knowledge than Western scientific knowledge, and to integrate that, which of course is vital, because any form of conservation, assess, plan, network, or communicate, really requires us to be involved in co-production or collaborative approaches. And gone are the days, I sincerely hope, when scientists would swoop in and tell local communities what to do from an incomplete understanding of what was even going on the ground. So the next one I'm going to present is again in the assess context, and this is Elsa Camins Martinez, who is going to talk about her work with iSeahorse as part of the Seahorse, Pipefish, and Sea Dragon Specialist Group. So in this case, we're not talking specifically about local ecological knowledge, but more about global understanding that can be derived from accessing all sorts of citizens and members of our community.
Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the community science project called iSeahorse, created by Project Seahorse. So before I start more deep talking about iSeahorse, I would like to present why we should be using marine community science to study seahorses. While seahorses have some characteristics as living in coastal areas, having a sparse distribution, small home ranges, and low mobility, that can make them difficult to be studied with traditional survey methods. This has led to them being cryptic species, and from the 46 described species, 17 of them are still listed as data deficient on the IUCN Red List, and 3 of them have never been studied yet. They are also iconic flagship taxon, which means that they can raise sympathy from the public and financial support for conservation. That's why sometimes they have been used to promote conservation objectives like help create marine protected areas. iSeahorse has focused primarily in the type of opportunistic observations, which means that anyone from anywhere in the world who sees a seahorse in the wild can submit their photo observation, no matter their background, whether they are diving, just snorkeling, or walking on the beach. We use the platform called iNaturalist, and from there we have amassed more than 11,000 observations from 41 different species. And we have almost 2,000 contributors. With all this data that we've acquired, we do an ID verification, which is done bi-weekly by one of our team members to make sure that all the species have been properly ID'd. At the time that we analyzed the data, we did a data validation, which included downloading all the data and checking that all observations were seahorses, that they were properly ID'd in the right location. This data included ID guess, a photo, a location, and a date observed. And we also asked 15 additional questions that kind of give us some information about depth, habitat, hold fast, activity when observed, or pregnancy. And after all that, we did the data analysis. Some of the general results that we acquired from the last data analysis was we obtained observation for 35 species, and that was a total of 7,795 observations acquired at the time. All the observations came from 97 countries from all around the world, mainly the main ones coming from Australia and the US. We also observed that from the 35 species, 9 of them, there were observations that were outside the probably described range from IUCN. Here I have an example of Hippocampus comes, where you can see the icy horse observations, which are the black dots. Quite a few of them are outside of the IUCN range with the gray area. For 24 species, we observed that these observations were providing new habitats that were not described before in the IUCN red list. Looking at the depth, we observed that for 7 of them, there was observations at shallower depth than described, and for 6 of them, they were at deeper depth than what described. And 96% of the observations were coming from diving. We also obtained information for 15 species out of their sex ratio. And for 11 of them, there was observations that were expanding the pregnancy seasonality that was previously described. So overall, simply put, iCHorse is a tool that is helping study seahorses and also conservation and helping advance marine conservation. Thank you, everyone. Hi, everyone.
So iSeahorse is there for community science action, and Project Seahorse is the host of the IUCN SSC Seahorse, Pipefish, and Sea Dragon Specialist Group. So again, we're finding ways to assess the status of our wild species in a more comprehensive way. And now let me move into what I've loosely called planning. And this is how we actually enable government to take action once it has technical knowledge. And here we have Yvonne Sadovi, who's been based in Hong Kong for decades, talking as the co-chair of the Grouper and RAS Specialist Group.
I am very excited to share with you a project that I'm doing in Hong Kong with an amazing team on an amazing fish. This fish is the Napoleon, or the humphead wrasse, that's another name for it, and it's one of the largest, most valuable, but most threatened of reef fishes. It's endangered under IUCN Red List. It's on CITES Appendix 2. It was listed in 2004, and it's a Class 2 threatened species in mainland China. The major threats to the species are overfishing, and with a particular focus on juveniles and subadults. These are the main ones that are being taken. And there is poor control on international trade. And it's this control on international trade that I'll be focusing on today. Now, the major exporter is Indonesia, and the major importer, as an import hub and a transshipment center, is Hong Kong. And both Indonesia and Hong Kong have been engaged in controlling the trade of this fish. But we do know from our studies in Hong Kong that illegal trade continues. And since we're not seeing recovery in source country, that we know that this illegal trade continues to also threaten the species. So we're focusing on this aspect, looking at illegal trade. Now, in Hong Kong, fish come in, and some are legally imported with CITES permits, and some come in illegally. And this illegal import is usually or much heavily done by vessels. That seems to be the major source of illegal imports. Now, if we see a fish in a retail outlet, these animals are for the seafood trade, and outside of restaurants, you will see them in tanks. People can go along and then select the fish they want. But because the fish are not tagged, it means it's impossible after entering the city to know whether the fish is illegally imported or not. And so to effectively control the trade, we've got to be able to distinguish between these two categories of fish and help to enforce, help to strengthen the enforcement of trade into and within the city. So a number of people have been working on this species for many years. And what we have noticed is that these beautiful facial markings that this animal has are quite complex. And we've discovered that they are individually distinct. So you can distinguish individuals, one from the other, and these markings last for quite long periods of time, at least a couple of years. And so, like human fingerprints, we can use these patterns on the Napoleon's face to be able to identify and track individuals. And just to give you an idea, the turnaround time in the city for a single fish would be less than 1 month. So these markings are very well suited to the dynamics of the trade of this species. So we put together a small team of experts, IT experts, and these experts worked on developing a mobile phone app that enabled photographs to be taken and analyzed. So this is the Saving Face app. And there are two programs, one that extracts the facial patterns from photos of this fish. And the second program compares facial patterns between different individuals. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But this extraction and comparison is the basis of this phone app. And the way it works is you have somebody takes a picture of a fish in a tank, or you could take a picture of a fish in the field, a diver, and then load up photos onto a gallery to be used by the app. The app is shown in one of the screen images here. It's a little fish with a profile there. The app then enables a fish image to be loaded up into the app, and then that new fish image is compared with the database on the right-hand side of stored images. So let me give you an example of how this works. Imagine there's a new image, and that new image is in the top of the two sets of photos here. So that's the upper left and the upper right. That's a new image. And we want to compare that new image with images already in the database, photos that have already been taken. So on the left-hand side, the same fish is taken, it's a different picture, and there's a comparison, and you might just be able to see a little number at the lower right of the lower image. It's 93%. That's the accuracy of the comparison. It's the same fish. On the right-hand side, you've got the new fish, which is the upper one, and it's compared with a different animal, a different fish, and you have a lower percentage of accuracy. And so this enables us to identify animals which are likely matches between a new fish image and an image that has been taken in the past. So how does this actually work in enforcement operations? Legally imported fish, those with CITES permits, are photographed on entry to Hong Kong, or fish are photographed, fingerprinted, once they reach a retail outlet. They should not move between retail outlets. And any Napoleon face that does not match a record, a legal import, can then be investigated. So this is how this app is supposed to work. And what are the outcomes so far? The facial recognition concept has been already successfully used in prosecutions to confirm illegal fish. We're continually improving the comparison module and improving the accuracy of comparisons. The Hong Kong government is now tailoring the app to its enforcement needs. And just last year, BBC filmed a documentary of this particular project as one of the positive conservation stories in Asia. And I want to recognize the amazing Saving Face team, particularly Lo Bihao and Tony Ng. And I hope you've enjoyed this, and it's been wonderful to be able to present it to you all. Thank you.
So I think we will agree that this is not just, this is a wonderful combination of assess, plan, and act in one integrated project. We're developing the tools, we're getting the legislators to embrace them, and we're also actually seeing it deployed for prosecutions. So this offers real hope. And for those of you who don't know, CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It's the global convention that actually regulates the exports of species that are or may become threatened by international trade. And a story that is buried in Yvonne's wonderful little talk there was the fact that we even have marine fish species on CITES, because that itself is remarkable progress. So let me move to another story that is working in the context of planning. And this is Eric Hoyt talking from the Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force about spatial planning.
Hello, I'm Eric Hoyt from the Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force, which I co-chair with Giuseppe Notarbartolo de Chiara. And I'd like to talk to you a bit about our task force and how we've developed a new tool called Important Marine Mammal Areas, or IMAs, and as our contribution to reverse the red. Now, in 2013, 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, we started the task force, and we built it into an IMA secretariat of 8 people and more than 30 different regional coordinators. And we now have a legacy of more than 300 scientists that we've worked with in different parts of the world to identify these important marine mammal areas. What is an IMA? What is an important marine mammal area? It's a discrete portion of habitat important for one or more marine mammal species that have the potential to be delineated and managed for conservation. An IMA is not a marine protected area. It's not identified on the basis of management considerations. And the identification of IMAs is an evidence-based, purely biocentric process based on the application of scientific criteria on the best available science. This will give you an idea of the map. We have, through the workshop process, we have candidate IMAs that are proposed by regional expert groups, and then they're reviewed by an independent panel before being posted on IMAs on the IMA e-Atlas, which you see before you. I'll just run this animation. I'm not sure whether, yeah, it'll work. That shows you when you click on different areas, what you get, all the background information and maps, and the reason why it was identified as an important area. Now, 66% of IMAs were identified based on important habitat for a threatened marine mammal species. So this is the key figure. And we've now, to date, identified habitat for 91 of the 134 recognized marine mammal species. We'll have quite a few more once we get to the Arctic and the North Pacific. IMAs cover more than 35 million square kilometers, comprising 13% of the global ocean. And that breaks down into 58% within exclusive economic zone waters and 42% within the ABNJ, the high seas. And IMAs occupy 7% of the ABNJ surface, but that, again, that will increase. And we hope, this will provide data and an important tool in terms of the UN goal, Target 3, of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. To date, this is since 2016, we have had 770 downloads of the IMA spatial layers that have been accessed by users from over 80 countries. And you can see the sort of type of usage that people are using these IMAs for, a lot of them for industry or business, a lot for academia, non-governmental and governmental and intergovernmental organizations. So across a broad spectrum of metadata requests that we've had. And that's increasing all the time. So thanks very much for listening. Here are some links if you want to get in touch and further. Thank you. Cheers.
So buried in there are just so many bits of good news. For example, who would have thought that all the countries of the world would come together to agree that we need to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030 and set up active measures to achieve that target? And okay, the protection may not always be perfect, but my goodness, let's be grateful for what we have. That's quite remarkable. Also buried in there, for example, was a mention of ABNJ, areas beyond national jurisdiction. and the fact that we now have a high seas treaty that is helping to regulate what happens in the areas of the ocean beyond 200 kilometers offshore, 200 nautical miles offshore. These are really lovely stories that are tapped into there. Also, for example, the fact that the information that's being provided in deciding what are important marine mammal areas is being accessed and used by industry as well as by government and NGOs and so on. So the momentum is gathering, and for that we must be truly grateful, leading us forward into really encouraging stories of action. So let me now introduce the brand new Seaweed Specialist Group, which has already developed a gorgeous logo. And the Seaweed Specialist Group, which was just founded about a year ago, is up and booming, trying to identify hope and opportunity to make a difference for seaweeds. And this, again, I should mention, is a story that matters because we had very few specialist groups for habitat forming organisms. But we now have seagrasses and mangroves and corals and seaweeds and also sponges coming online. Again, a sign of greater respect for the diversity of the ocean. So let me introduce you to seaweeds.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Noor Alfed-Almao. I'm the co-chair of the IUCN Seaweed Specialist Group, and I'm also a postdoc at Hopkins Marine Station at Stanford University in California. And I'm really happy to present a little bit of our work today as part of the World Species Congress. The work that I'm going to present today, just to acknowledge, is part of the work of a PhD student here working with us. Her name is Joy Kumagai. Just wanted to acknowledge that. And we're going to present this amazing positive story of how marine protected areas are providing resilience against climate impacts to kelp forest. So this is where I work. It's a giant kelp forest. It's very similar to terrestrial rainforest, but underwater. So imagine that. There's over 120 kelp species in the world, and this one is the largest one of all. It's full of life. It's an amazing place. But unfortunately, many places today look like this. They're dominated by urchins, which are eating the kelp and not allowing it to recover. And there's a reason why that is happening. We have this species that eat the urchin. In this case, for California, they're lobsters and sheephead, this fish. But when these species are overfished or overexploited, they cannot do their job, and the urchins overgraze kelp because no one is controlling them. But of course, there's a way of reversing that, and that's through establishing marine protected areas that can recover biodiversity in general, but particularly they can recover this important species that can eat the urchins and avoid the urchins overgrazing the kelp. That's something that has been shown in many parts of the world, but the question now is, does that work under climate impacts? So we have this perfect case study in California where we have more than 100 marine protected areas. There's a network of marine protected areas. But in addition, we had this unprecedented marine heat wave that impacted kelp forests between 2014-16. A marine heat wave is an anomalous time where the temperature of the ocean is higher than expected. And that impacts many species, particularly kelp forest. So when kelp forests are lost because of a heat wave, urchins kind of go wild and start to overgraze because they're hungry. Now, the idea is that if we can recover this species that can eat the urchins, we may prevent that from happening. And that's what we found in this study. So when we look at what happened during the heat waves for kelp forest, we found that inside fully protected areas, these areas are very restrictive, kelp forest had less of a loss than the other places, while after the heat wave, they also recovered better. So it seems that MPAs are working for providing resilience for kelp forest. And this is how it looks today in some of these places where we have these marine protected areas. Healthy kelp forests, full of life. We have sea lions, we have seals, big animals, lobsters, abalones, and so on in some of the places. While in the other places that are unprotected, some of them, not all, but some of them look like this, dominated by these urchins. We don't have kelp, we don't have much life overall, and it's really sad. And that has implications for the local communities that depend on this forest. So why is that happening? We kind of already mentioned it, but when we look at the information that we have almost 20 years of information of underwater census, divers counting fish and lobsters and urchins and all of these things. When we compare between fully protected MPAs, partially protected that allow some activity, and no protection, we can see in the left panel how urchins decrease through time during and after the heat wave in the protected areas, in the fully protected areas, compared to the less protected areas, which is good. And then we also see that their predators increase through time. Like lobster, the red color represents the heat wave years, and then it's after. So we can see how during the heat wave years, lobsters maintained or increased, same for the other species, and then they kept increasing through time. So this is the evidence that these marine protected areas are helping kelp forests to withstand all of these impacts from climate change, which is a great story to tell because MPAs work, not only for recovering biodiversity, but also as a climate adaptation tool. Thanks everyone for your time, and I hope you enjoyed it.
So here we have an example of marine protected areas working for kelp, adding impetus to the need for us to push on that 30% protected by 2030. It's a very good news story for kelp that are under threat in large parts of the world with climate change. And then we move on to our final case study, which is from Nicole Duplay from the Otter Specialist Group, where she tells a story about population recovery, initially through translocations, that's very interesting.
Hi, I'm Nicole Duplay. I'm the co-chair of the Otter Specialist Group. And we have been writing management plans and conserving otters around the world for 50 years. This has made a huge difference, and I'm going to tell you about just one success story. Everybody loves sea otters, watching mother otters with their babies on their tummies in California off the dock or in Alaska. I think that sea otters are by far one of the most popular of the 13 species of otters. But what happened is that in 1740, they were discovered by the fur traders and whalers in the Alaska area, and they were going all the way up and down the coast, killing sea otters to the extent that the population of 300,000 otters was reduced to just a remnant here and there. There were 30 in California and very small little groups in Alaska. So this was a very tragic circumstance, and we had to wait until 1913 for sea otters to be protected and hunting banned. Now we have about 97,000 sea otters that have made a comeback. It wasn't until the late 60s that they came up with the idea of reintroducing little sea otter populations here and there in good habitat for them to recover. They did this in Alaska, in Washington State, and in California. It was successful, but it took a very long time. For instance, in California, there are only 3,000 sea otters, and they had a very, very slow population increase. So what are sea otters? Well, they live in groups and near shore in protected coves or along the coast. And they basically float on their back. Sometimes they come ashore. They can dive up to about 60 feet and stay underwater for 3 minutes or so. And they eat mainly urchins, crabs, clams, and oysters, depending on the region where they live. Now, what happens is that once they inhabit and populate a region where they were completely absent before, there is a conflict. The local fishermen who have been very happily collecting clams and oysters and crabs see the new sea otter inhabitants as a competitor, and conflict arises. Fortunately, long IUCN tradition, we sit down and talk with both parties. It's called conservation planning, and come to agreements. And this has worked very well. Now, today we have about 97,000 sea otters in North America. And sea otters populations used to extend along the top of the Pacific from Japan all the way down to Mexico. And now they extend, there are a few, literally a few handful, under 10 in Japan. And they no longer really extend to Mexico. So we knew very little about in the 60s about translocations, but now we're very good at it. We're planning to reintroduce sea otters to Oregon, where they have been missing, soon in the next 3 or 4 years. So the story of sea otters and its close association with conservation planning by the IUCN continues. Stay tuned.
And there's an encouraging story indeed, and a reminder that you can't proceed in conservation without constant consultation. I know where I live, the First Nations Indigenous people find the resurgence of sea otters something to be concerned about sometimes because, as Nicole said, of its implications for the mollusk populations that the Indigenous people use heavily. So it's constantly a cycle which takes us back to assess and plan and act. And just a reminder as we go forward that we definitely, if we want to get good population impacts, need to have those assessment capacities, the technical outputs. We also very much need to have the planning and the policy engagement, the policy outcomes. Most importantly, we have to have the field outcomes where we're connecting the intention with the animals. And that, my friend, is where the challenges lie, because we have a bit of a dam on that metaphorical flow. And the big focus increasingly has to be on the action, the connection of the intention to the animals, to the plants, to the spaces, the fungi. So with that, we want to remind you that you can access more information at the Marine Conservation Committee website, and also that World Ocean Day is tomorrow, 8th of June, and we would like you to celebrate in every way you can, talk up the ocean, get people to engage with the ocean, and let's help us build more promising progress for the marine species. And we're so grateful that you came and you cared about the ocean and are willing to be ocean ambassadors with us. And with that, I'll introduce Coralie Palmer, who is the marine coordinator at the Global Center for Species Survival, based at Indianapolis Zoo. Now, Coralie, I think we're out of time for the 1 hour session. Can we extend on to allow for questions? I can't hear you.
We just have one question in the chat, so hopefully we can just do that very quickly. And this is a question: can overfishing of invasive marine species affect countries using fishing as a job?
Can overfishing of invasive marine species affect countries that use fishing as a job? Well, fishing, of course, is an occupation in a great many countries, probably almost all countries, maybe not so much the Vatican City, but a huge number of countries are very dependent on fisheries. And we're very respectful of the fact that we're always trying to reconcile fisheries and conservation. We don't want to eliminate fisheries. We need to manage the problem fisheries, the fisheries that add tremendous pressures to the ocean, because make no mistake about it, fisheries are the biggest pressure on most marine species. Invasive species come in and cause a number of consequences for marine species that are usually of concern. For example, the lionfish has come into the Caribbean and is putting a lot of pressure on native species. And an encouragement to fish the lionfish heavily can only do good things for the fishery, but also for the wild species. So I think in general, invasive species are a significant pressure on the host country, the species of the host country, as is fishing. So they act synergistically. And I think realistically that what we want is well-managed, sustainable fisheries of species that belong in that country. It's very difficult to eradicate invasive species once they've arrived, but they're certainly unwelcome, and any attempt to fish them down is much to be applauded. If you have more questions about fisheries, we're really glad to answer them, because fisheries, as I say, are the biggest single threat on marine species. So by all means, reach out. Coralie, anything else?
Those were all the questions. So yes, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Yeah, and I want to particularly thank the chairs of all the specialist groups who put together those talks and who work on a volunteer basis so incredibly hard for our ocean species. If you or anybody else has particular species expertise and would like to get involved, please reach out to us. And Coralie, I don't know if you can put some contact info in the chat. Otherwise, you can reach out through the Marine Conservation Committee website, and we would love to hear from you. Meantime, thank you so much for joining us. We're really grateful for your interest and your contributions.